Welcome back. It's time for the Security Brief. Now, you might have thought, since we're in Washington and on the eve of a historic US election, that we might be taking a breather from the Security Brief this week. But why would we? The outcome of next week's vote will have profound implications for both wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, for their allies, not to mention the United States' future relationship with Moscow and Beijing. November the 19th will mark the 1000th day since Russian troops invaded the greater part of Ukraine. And in the past few weeks, North Korea has now become more directly involved. The Supreme Leader, Kim Jong-un, has deployed over 10,000 troops to Russia. So what does all that mean for the future of the war? What are North Korean soldiers capable of, and how might the West respond? With me to discuss, as ever, our resident analyst, former senior British officer Mikey Kay, who for 20 years flew assault helicopters for the RAF. He is a former strategic military planner, and if you followed us before, you will know that we do this as he would deliver it within the armed forces. Good to see you, Mikey. So since we are split this week with the Atlantic between us, we should focus on the election and remind our viewers of the two differing approaches that these candidates have to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, Christian, good to see you. Two very, very contrasting policies. One that will reassure the Ukrainian President Zelensky, and the other one that I'm sure will provide a catastrophic outlook for him. If we start with Kamala Harris, she's very much taking the view that she's supporting Article 2 of the UN Charter, which is all about sovereignty and political independence. She's outlined her support for Ukraine. She's been very clear about that. But one of the things when it comes to her personal view being very positive is her ability to actually implement any bills being passed inside Congress. Because if she does win the election but doesn't necessarily win the majority in the House or the Senate, then passing bills through Congress is going to become quite difficult for her. So that's basically Kamala Harris's stance. If we go slide. What we can see here is, what jumps out immediately, Christian, is just the significant amount of aid financially that the US is providing, over $61 billion. Now, this is really important when it comes to the other nominee, former President Trump. He basically, it is indicated, will force Zelensky into conceding territory in the Donbass region, for example, but also not just conceding territory, it's all about the provocation of access to NATO. And so the thoughts are that Trump basically will not only ask Zelensky to concede territory, not only will prevent Ukraine from accessing NATO, but there's also wider of that. There's also definite thoughts on Trump's support for NATO. We saw during his term of 4 years, he was very pro-Putin and really questioned the ability of America to keep supplying the financial effort that it's been putting into NATO.
When you listen to his running mate, J.D. Vance, he effectively talks about freezing the conflict where it is, Mikey. What would that mean, essentially, for Ukraine?
Well, if you go back to the slide graphic, 61 billion spent by the US, but if you total up those numbers underneath on that graph, Christian, you get to about 50 billion, which means about 110 billion in total, of which the US is providing nearly 60% of that number. So there's a huge question that European and NATO military planners have got to ask here, which is, if America or Trump did pull that 60 billion of support, would there be financial capability for those other member nations and partner allies to be able to, in some way, address that deficit of 60 billion and therefore keep providing Ukraine and up the ante, if you like, which would put President Zelensky obviously in a very powerful position? Or is the analysis and is the conclusion going to come from NATO and partnering allies without the US that actually they can't succeed in terms of what President Zelensky's aims are and actually withdraw slowly over a period of time, or withdraw it all completely and force Zelensky to the negotiating table and have to concede on those two areas?
Yeah, and then of course we come to the involvement of the other countries, Iran and North Korea. And we've had various intelligence agencies confirming this week that North Korean troops have been sent to Russia. Today, in fact, the North Korean foreign minister was in Moscow visiting her counterpart, saying that they will back Russia until victory in Ukraine.
We have no doubt that under the wise leadership of the esteemed president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, the Russian army and people will certainly achieve a great victory in their sacred struggle to protect the sovereign rights and security interests of their state. And we once again assure that until the day of victory, we will always firmly stand next to our Russian comrades.
So there you have the North Korean foreign minister speaking today, Mikey, in Moscow. What do we know about these North Korean troops and their capability?
Yeah, well, whenever I hear a soundbite that includes the word victory, my mind instantly jumps to what does that actually mean? What is the end state of Russian troops in Ukraine? What is the end state of North Korean support to Russia? We've got NATO Secretary General on record saying that they do have intelligence that there are over 10,000 troops that have entered inside Russia. And if we can go slide, please. What you'll see from this map is a very, very small but important border between the north of North Korea and Russia itself. And obviously that'll be the access point for these troops getting into Russia, conducting this training. And what Putin's saying at the moment, Christian, is that it's for exercise purposes, it's for training purposes, it's for sharing experience. And what Putin's saying is that it's Russians' sovereign right. And this is important because we'll come and we'll address that a little bit later on. There's also evidence that DPRK is supplying Putin with ballistic missiles and also ammunition. If we can go to the next slide, please. What this is going to show you is where we think, or where intelligence indicates that those troops are heading for, and it's the region of Kursk, Oblast. Indications from the UN, the Ukraine's UN ambassador, who was speaking at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on Wednesday. He says that they're expecting as many as 4,500 North Korean troops coming into that particular region. Now, why this is really important is the Kursk Oblast region, if we can just go back to the slide, please, shares a 200-kilometer border with Ukraine. When it comes to attack versus defense ratios, in an urban environment, Christian, you need 5 times the amount of troops on an attack basis, and in a rural environment, you need a ratio of 3 to 1. Now, what we know is that Ukraine already has entered that region and is holding territory. But in order to hold that territory, it's got to have 5 times as many troops as the defending troops. If it's in an urban area, if it's in a rural area, it's a 3 to 1 ratio. Now, when you look across the border in Ukraine, you've got 2 really important cities. You've got Sumy and Kharkiv. And Kharkiv has been a target of Putin for a long time now. So strategic military planners, if I was inside Zelensky's cabinet, we would be looking at what is the importance of holding that territory inside Russia, what is the strategic significance of that, versus pulling those forces back to support and bolster what might be the targets of the North Korean troops and a Russian offensive across the border in Kharkiv and in Sumy. So I think they're the big questions that are going to be playing on strategic military planners' minds at the moment.
But what I don't understand is what Pyongyang gets out of this. I mean, what is the quid pro quo for the supreme leader?
We know that Kim Jong has basically had nuclear aspirations for a long time now. But I think what's important in this context is there are 3 really important components to building a nuclear capability. One is the enrichment program, so you've got to make the material. The other one is then building a warhead. And then if we can go slide, please. The third one is actually building a capability and a technology that allows Kim Jong to put that warhead into a target wherever he wants to, wherever he sees as a threat. Now, why this is important, what we're looking at here, Christian, is this is video footage from yesterday's test, and it was a test by North Korea on a ballistic missile system that actually went the furthest that any one of its tests has ever gone, landing about 200 kilometers off the Japanese coast. So the nuclear capability is, I think, what the quid pro quo would be. Kim Jong's obviously got the third part of that component, which is the ability to deliver it, advanced, but it'll be the enrichment and it'll be the building of the warhead that I think Putin's capabilities will be able to assist with.
So, Micah, when we've talked about the United States' response to this, I think we've said consistently now on the programme that Joe Biden has given the Ukrainians just enough not to lose. And I guess to a certain extent it depends on who becomes the next president. But what do you think the Pentagon and Washington's response would be to what we've just discussed?
Yeah, we've spoken about courses of action on the program before, and it's a critical point of the planning in terms of how Ukraine will respond and how Russia will respond. But the most likely COA, in my assessment, all comes down to Zelensky's victory plan. And within that is a request for a capability called the Army Tactical Missile System, which is called ATACMS. It's a very sophisticated missile that has a range of about 190 miles that's put on the back of what's called a HIMARS launcher. And it allows basically Zelensky to deep strike at targets inside Russia. If we can go to slide, please. Now, Ukraine and Zelensky does have this capability already. He was shipped medium-range capability, medium-range ATACMS capability, back in September 2023, and he does now have long-range capability, so he does have the ability to deep strike, and that will give him 190 miles territory, around 300 kilometers, and he received that capability from the US in April this year. But what makes this capability really important is that when it's used in conjunction with the HIMARS launcher, it's extremely mobile, it's extremely agile, so it can do what's called a shoot and scoot. So it can launch the missile system, and then it can be mobile, and it can basically get out of the way of targeting systems of Russia. So that gives Zelensky an incredible amount of flexibility whilst protecting the systems itself. But what else is really clever about the system, Christian? If we can go to slide, please. This is video footage. It's paused at the moment, but you can see from the cover of that launcher, there's six covers on it, 6 green circles that would indicate to any observing enemy forces that there might be 6 rocket launchers in there. However, if we play the video, what you can see is that cover is just a mask, and out pops an ATACMS missile. So basically you can have this capability, the HIMARS and the ATACMS, going around the battlefield, and the Russians won't know what capability is inside it. Does it have a deep strike capability, or does it have a shorter rocket capability that goes out to about 75 kilometers? The third reason for the importance of this capability, as you can see why Zelensky really wants it, is basically all they have at the moment is the UK contribution, which is the Storm Shadow. If we can get a video of the Storm Shadow, please. It's a single missile. It's launched from a jet. That's a British GR4 Tornado, but it's not as versatile. I was speaking about the versatility of having the HIMARS launcher. This has to have, in order to launch one missile, you've got to have a jet, and the jet's got to have the capability of a runway. So you can see the constraints already on Storm Shadow, which is why Zelensky is basically pinning a lot on the ATACMS capability. So basically, Christian, you've got tactical effect and the systems being delivered to Ukraine, but the big thing that he's looking for at the moment is the go-ahead from the Biden administration to actually use it and deep strike on counteroffensive.
Yeah, and the reason he's not been allowed to use it is because there have been these threats from Vladimir Putin coming the other way. So if, as you say, that is COA 1, do you suspect there is another COA that President Zelensky is looking at?
Well, yeah, I think there is another course of action. Remember when we were speaking about Putin's response to North Korean troops coming inside Russia, and he spoke about it was his sovereign right. The US envoy to the UN, and I'll quote, said, should DPRK's troops enter Ukraine in support of Russia, they will surely return in body bags. So I would advise Chairman Kim to think twice about engaging in such reckless and dangerous behavior. Now, if you read between the lines of that, Christian, that to me basically says that if DPRK troops are going to start to be used on offensive inside Ukraine, then I think that is basically a soundbite which says you're saying that it's your sovereign right to train and use and deploy with North Korean troops. Why shouldn't it be Zelensky's sovereign right to be able to train, operate and deploy with NATO troops? And I think that is going to be certainly on the table when they're looking at how North Korean troops are being used in the Kursk Oblast region.
I mean, just quickly to finish, Mikey, I was reading the comments yesterday. Michael McFaul, who's the former US ambassador to Moscow, and he was saying surely this is a humiliation for Vladimir Putin, a Russian strongman, to have North Korean troops coming to his aid. The question, of course, that begs is why does he need them? I mean, what is it that's wrong with the Russian fighting forces that they can't do this on their own?
Well, I think since the I think the big figure that really stands out is since the start of the war, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, data suggests that Russia has either lost through dead or wounded over 450,000 troops. I mean, that is a huge figure. Putin is saying that he's got an army of 700,000 that are currently being used in all the offensives. One of Putin's serious critical requirements at the moment is the ability to keep feeding those numbers of infantry onto the battlefield. If you look at some of his vulnerabilities, it's the age and the capability of his technology that he's using. He's been exposed. One of the big talking points is he has been exposed with what capability he has, and we can see video footage of these armored vehicles, and there's his nuclear arsenal, but all of these things are coming into play when it looks at pointing at what his critical vulnerabilities are. And I think this is a very, very open and clear indication that one of them is the support of infantry, which DPRK in North Korea will be achieving or trying to achieve, filling that void.
Yeah, you do get the sense, don't you, that we're at a pivotal moment in this war, and the election on Tuesday plays no small part in that. Mikey, as ever, it's really good to get your analysis on what is going on in Ukraine. We do this every week just to remind you that all the back editions of the Security Brief are on the BBC YouTube channel. Do go and have a look at that. We will do it again same time next week. Thanks for watching.